so much, Libby and to Cliff for putting together another wonderful Litchfield Tea and Poetry series. This is the 13th annual run, and we're ending it in fine style with two South Carolina treasures, homegrown treasures, I guess we could say, even though they're coming to us from far away, reasonably far away, Louisiana. Ashley Mace Havird and David Havird, and it's not an accident, the last names they are. They are, in fact, married. They're a writing, I won't say a writing fighting couple, but hopefully just a writing couple, but they are a dynamic duo, and both incredibly accomplished. I'll start by introducing Ashley first, because she's going to lead off for us, and I'll give her bio, and then when David comes up, I'll give you the specs on David, but they're both quite accomplished. It's a lot for one household, and we'll get to share that embarrassment of riches today. Wonderful writers, wonderful poets, and we can be very proud that they help enrich South Carolina literature. So great to have them here to close off the Litchfield Tea and Poetry Series 2019. So first off will be Ashley Mace Havird. She grew up on a tobacco farm outside Marion, South Carolina, not too far away from us here. She's currently serving as the Poet Laureate of Caddo Parish in Louisiana. Ashley has published 3 collections of poetry, including The Garden of the Fugitives, 2014, which won the 2013 X.J. Kennedy Prize. Her work has appeared in many highly respected journals, including Shenandoah, the Southern Review, and the Virginia Quarterly Review. Those are all big names in the poetry biz, or po-biz, as we say, as well as in anthologies such as the Southern Poetry Anthology and Hardline's Rough South Poetry. She's a switch hitter, I guess we could say. She hits from both sides of the plate. She's also a fiction writer. Her debut novel, Lightning Struck, she read from it here a couple of years ago, right in this very venue. Lightning Struck in 2016 was honored with the 2015 Farrell Sams Award and was named an Editor's Choice by the Historical Novel Society. A wonderful novel set on a tobacco farm outside Marion, South Carolina in the 1960s. If you haven't read it, you need to go get a copy. In July 2017, she and her husband, the poet David Havird, were writers in residence at the Chautauqua Institution. So here we have Ashley Mace Havird to share her poetry with us. Please welcome her.
Dan, that was a beautiful introduction, very generous. And thank you, Libby, where's Libby? There you are. Thank you for inviting us. We were asked, David and I were asked to say something helpful to other writers about this really strange thing that we're all doing, writing poems. Here's my helpful hint. And this is just kind of an important thing for me. One of the most important things and basic things has been for me to be aware, to have a deliberate awareness of the source or wellspring of my creative energy, which stems from my childhood in the swamps and the fields and the pine woods of the farm where I was brought up over in Marion County. So it's landscape. And then to a lesser extent, the beach, this part of the beach where my grandparents lived from the 1950s into the early 1990s. On that farm and on this beach, I learned to pay attention, to notice details of the world around me and collect those details. It became a habit of being, which feeds into my work. Something the poet Mary Oliver said really resonates with me, and this is a quote: "The world's otherness is antidote to confusion, and standing within this otherness, the beauty and mystery of the world can redignify the worst stung heart." So as a poet, this noticing, this paying attention will, if I'm lucky, kind of hook something that's already swimming around in my brain. And you can think of my brain as a swamp, full of weird and random stuff. And anyway, when that happens, when the surface image or event connects to the other, it's like catching a fish on a hook. And my job as a poet is to reel it in and to bring everything together. That is, to capture the poem. And I hope that makes sense. Anyway, if it doesn't, we can have a Q&A after, and you can ask me, what in the world did you mean by that? So, before I read from my own work, I want to share with you a poem by Claudia Emerson, a Virginia poet who died tragically young several years ago. She and I share a common sensibility in our focus on the natural world and the strange relationship that we humans have with that world. And this is the last poem in her Pulitzer Prize-winning volume called Late Life. Here it is. And anyway, the overarching theme of this book is her husband's first wife's death, which shadows their own new relationship and their life together. The name of this poem is Buying the Painted Turtle. Two boys, not quite men, pretended to let it go, only to catch it again and again. And the turtle, equally determined, each time gave its heart to escape them. We were near the base of an old dam where the river became a translucent, hissing wall, fixed in falling, where, by the size of it, the turtle had long trusted its defense. The streaming algae, green, black, red, the garden of its spine, not to fail it. They held it upside down, the yellow plastron exposed. They hoisted it over their heads like a trophy. I left it to you to do the bargaining. Exchange the money for us to save it. Let it go. Fast, it disappeared into deeper water, returning to another present, where the boulders cut the current to cast safer shadows of motionlessness. We were already forgotten then, like most gods, after floods recede, after fevers break. We did not talk about what we had bought, an hour, an afternoon, a later death, worth whatever we had to give for it. So that's Claudia Emerson. Now I have a poem about, not there, a poem about a turtle too. So I'm going to read my turtle poem next. I do have a new collection of poems, which isn't published yet. And in this collection, I have a series about my father's death. My brothers and I were lucky enough to all be there on our family farm during his last days. And this poem takes place behind our house on that farm. It's called Turtle and Snake. Anyway, I'm going to read 3 poems from that series and then do something else. This is called Turtle and Snake. I let go of his hand that stayed curled like a shell. The hand I pretended was holding mine too took the dirt road toward the swamp. At the edge of the field, to my left, a turtle. To my right, a snake, 5-footer, stick straight. Cottonmouth, if I wasn't mistaken. Without thinking the thing through, wanting nothing more than to fix, I moved the turtle out into the tall green, then saw in the road the lip of loose sand, the hole, the clutch. The snake, it came to me, I'm a bit slow, was waiting. Why, if it had to, it would wait all day. I set the turtle back, tried to anyhow, the way she had been. I wanted to believe she would blanket her eggs with soft dirt, camouflage the nest, outweight the snake. I walked on, hauling my hope like a heavy shell. The next poem, back in Shreveport, and the name of this poem is First Year. Mine was a child's fall, the hurt a mother or father can more or less fix with Band-Aids, a kiss. Almost to the top of the steep concrete steps to the gym, my toe jammed, caught my weight on stiff arms, decent reflexes for 63. Spectacularly bloody, my scraped raw palms, skinned knees. The healing, though, I was obsessed. Hands held out, fingers splayed. Imagine all those invisible cells repairing. First, the shredded skin. It dried overnight the way a fallen leaf dries. Next, the Archipelago of Scabs, the clear plastic film of scar. After a week, good as new. 9 months ago, my father died. Every day, at least once, but usually more, I think. You are gone from this world where you lived all my life. This unhealing, it seems a miracle. And this poem called Strays, back on the farm for this one, and it takes place some months before his final decline. Strays. I walk between downpours this overwet, overworn September, the swamp risen into the farm road. Trees lean as though they have spines that won't straighten. Gnats by the hundreds drown on my skin, stick there. My father's latest stray, half grown, half husky, racing through puddles, won't last long. They've taken stock, the far buzzards circling. They know the highway out front, its many scents, its barreling log trucks and bored kids speeding. Ahead, not scat, but a spill of grapes, limb overhanging, entwined, globe-heavy vine, stray seed rooted, climbed, purple muscadine. I follow my footprints back, my cupped hands filled. Smell them. My father's eyes hear my words. Eat, I now begin. Eat. Wild juice baptizes our chins, and we are born again. My father's back straightens. The highway refuses the stray. Fingers grow sticky in bee-giddy arbors of girlhood. Left with what's left, we spit out sour pulp, bitter seed, crushed skin. And for a change of pace, I'm going to read a poem from my collection, this one, The Garden of the Fugitives. And I am lucky. I not only have the best friend in the world, who came from Charleston today with her best boyfriend, but she also has a condominium in the Caribbean, where we're going to be in a few weeks yet.
Not me.
But not David. But before the condo, there was a house where I stayed by myself years ago and actually drafted the very first draft of the book which became Lightning Struck many years later. So, this is a poem that takes place there when I was staying by myself. It's called On Cayman, Brac. At first, I hardly slept. The nights were so uncommonly dark. The lecturing sea so foreign. A babble collapsing through French doors stopped open for the breeze, with ballast beached from the wrecked Prince Frederick. I kept mistaking for a storm a mere fireworks display, heat lightning to the east, and some token thunder. Overhead a smear, the Milky Way, never rain. A cat crept in those nights and ate craters in the bread left on the counter. Paw prints led from the clawed-through garbage bag, drooling mango peels. I never heard a thing. Odd. I wasn't sleeping. But now, after some 3 nights of study, I've learned this sea's cacophony of tongues, and each abrasive whisper translates sleep. The deep lungs, moist and fishy, purr, dream. This sea, this black, narcotic cat laps up my breath, sighs it back. And I'm going to close with a couple of poems that are, I don't know, I guess you'd say they're homage to Grand Strand poems. And they're in here somewhere. This one's called Beach Music. Myrtle Beach, 1966. Beach music. Clear from the shell pink stucco with turquoise trim motel she managed to the Pavilion Amusement Park. My grandmother's hand clamped mine. Convertibles blared down the boulevard. Under the boardwalk, what kind of fool? Ain't too proud to beg. 13, I flashed V's for peace at soldiers on leave. My too long, that's 200, my too long legs itched to run. The air was charged with Krispy Kreme, Coppertone, footlongs, sea spray. She squeezed my hand till it hurt at the saltwater taffy machine whose metal arms worked pastel ribbons, its window framed with colored lights reflecting her face, lit up like a child's. Stay just a little bit longer. We were so close to the rides, I could hear the clack, clack, clack of the roller coaster teasing up its wooden scaffold. Release, so close, a screaming plunge. And one more. This is called Waterline. David and I tend to use our screen porch whenever possible at home, even in the depths of the soggy Louisiana summer. So, but anyway, this is kind of a true story poem-ish, true story, called Waterline. We sit on the porch at supper, so homesick for the Atlantic. We cast, catch, reel it west, 1,000 miles across 17, 95, and 20, across the PD, Mississippi, and Red, till, sure enough, it smacks and thrashes right over Shreveport, LA. Comes to rest with the tide swell of cicadas, the hush-baby waves of wind through heavy-leafed oaks outside these old screens. When they weep, the hawks turn into gulls. Orange cannas break into flame. Tiki torches from the 1960s, back when our tans were deep, bodies lean, feet sore from that trek on the shell-sharp waterline from Huntington Beach to Litchfield, and when the moon drank the tide down across to Pawleys Island. Sting of lemon on grilled trout, crisp, burnt skin. Just as we used to, we cut the salt with gin.
Well, thank you so much, Ashley. That was wonderful. And this is National Poetry Month, April, every year, and this is part of our celebration too. Having these wonderful poets, and we'll have an Alabama poet come in, Adam Vines, on Monday morning at 10 a.m. So y'all can come back for that. But this is a wonderful way Ashley's poems made the National Poetry Month. She kind of reset that as local. You know, it's a national celebration, but those were just a wonderful celebration of our local landscape and those details that she was talking about, that she grew up in, right here, that habit of being, and that she collects in the writing, and that are so vivid and evocative, and she shared with us. So, and you know, what's amazing is these two people in the same, grew up together. David was telling us over lunch that he learned to ski, sort of, halfway, out in the inlet here, and it was a little dangerous, so he took a knock on the head with a ski, and that was that. So he stopped learning how to ski. But, you know, right here, because Ashley's family had a house here at the inlet, so they're really, you know, kind of born and bred in coming to this area. So it's part of their makeup. So this is part of them, and they're sharing it back with us. But they cohabitate, the writers together, and yet I think you'll notice their styles are very different. And their poetry is very wide-ranging. So we'll hear from David Havird here, despite all their connections. David is also a native South Carolinian. He studied with James Dickey at the University of South Carolina before earning his doctorate at the University of Virginia. And James Dickey, famous poet and writer, buried around the corner at All Saints Cemetery, right around the bend here. David's poems have been published in multiple anthologies and prominent journals, including The New Yorker, Yale Review, and Poetry, big-time journals again, as well as the Southern Poetry Anthology and Hardlines Rough South Poetry. His poetry collections include Penelope's Design in 2010, which won the Robert Phillips Poetry Chapbook Prize, the full-length collection Map Home, great title, 2013, and Weathering, Poems and Recollections, which is forthcoming in 2020. This last book, Weathering, brings together David's recent poems with 3 essays that chart David's coming of age through encounters with James Dickey, Robert Lowell, Archibald MacLeish, and other poets. David is professor of English at Centenary College of Louisiana. So please welcome the other half. I'll say they're each the other's better half. I won't take sides here, but the other half here, David Havird.
Thanks, Dan. Dan didn't tell you all, but that anthology, Hardlines, Rough South Poetry, is an anthology that he co-edited. It's a terrific anthology, not because Ashley and I are in it, although that's part of it. But I mean, it really is a terrific anthology. It's a lot of fun, and it's very affordable. So if you want a good anthology of contemporary Southern poetry, I highly recommend it. So I'm going to begin as Ashley did. I didn't actually realize that there were going to be so many poets here, who already know something. So what I have to say, sort of by way of helpful hints, it's going to seem very old hat to you. It's really just kind of a grouse. I was doing a reading several weeks ago with a young poet, and the question came up during the Q&A that followed. A student actually asked, how do you know if your idea is worthy of a poem? I think that's right, whether your idea was worthy of a poem. And frankly, the question sort of annoyed me. We had already responded earlier in the Q&A to a question about how poetry in our time can avoid an engagement in the political scene. The implication of that question was that right now poetry ought to be politically engaged. And both this younger poet and I said that, well, if we could address the issue in an essay or in a letter to the editor, we wouldn't write, the poem. And so I wanted to remind the questioner of this. A poem is at least, there are a lot of different kinds of poems, of course, but a lyric poem is a recreation of one's momentary engagement by means of the senses and the imagination with the sensory world, or with an element of it. The medium is words, and the work is play, playing with words. Auden, the poet W.H. Auden famously said that poems are made of words and not ideas. So I think if ideas are your thing, write an essay or a letter to the editor. If words are your thing, if the world out there that you experience by means of your senses are your thing, write a poem. So that's my advice. And I'm going to read a poem by a poet that I like very much. It's a poem by David Yezzi. And the book came out, I think, just last year. It's called Black Sea. Yes, it came out in 2018, and it's the book that I think I've most enjoyed. I did a review of the new book by David Bottoms, which I also liked very much, and it was a very positive review. But this book I like even better. The poem that I'm going to read is a sort of illustration, if you will, of what I was just telling you about playing with words, playing with the medium to create an artifact. He's not writing specifically about writing poetry. He's writing specifically about a guy on the beach who happens to make cairns, you know, as on the cover of Libby's book. I can't get the cover, but you know, stacking stones, making these cairns, which have become sort of popular to make, right? And I think that the poem is about, well, on the surface, it's about taking big rocks and positioning them, balancing them, so that they can work together to stand there by themselves when you, the maker, walk away, right? And I think that it's in sort of an allegorical way or metaphorical way about this art that we as writers are engaged in. In the case of this cairn maker, his medium consists of stones. In our case, our medium is words, and we play with the words. I think the only thing that I need to tell you, you may know this already, but Ben Gunn is a character in Treasure Island. So, the poem is called The Rock Balancer by David Yezzi from his book, Black Sea. Dead still, as if breathing with the rock, he holds a boulder in his grit-flecked hands. He tilts it to its base of smaller stones, rotating it minutely back and forth until he feels it grab or leap up, freed of gravity by keeping faithful to it. An arabesque on point, antic inversion, a chair poised on an acrobat's raised chin, or climber taking slack above a veil valley. Harsh granite makes a harmony with air. Most days, the cairns survey the beach alone, a stark coast guard out facing a cold sea. But today, he's with them, kneeling on the sand, their maker, Ben Gunn bearded, driftwood boned. He rents a room near here. By afternoon, save for the odd seabird, they'll keep their own mute company. The big heads standing out in a steady drizzle, as across the street the cafes cover tables in blue tarps, and the tide draws off the shore as they look on. I recommend this book, Black Sea by David Yezzi. I'm going to keep up this this beach theme and this local imagery theme. It actually began and read a poem of my own. When I was a kid, my grandmother kept a house for a cousin of ours, a niece of hers, up at Ocean Drive. And we would go down in the summer, of course, to spend time at the beach. And as long as grandmother kept this house, we would go there. And we were on our way when news came over the radio that Marilyn Monroe had died, had been found dead. And I had never heard of Marilyn Monroe. But anyway, that's part of the poem. And so I guess the only thing, a couple of things that I need to tell you. What sort of triggers the poem in the speaker's mind is something that a person whose name is Martha Ingram says, that whenever she passes a field of artichokes, she pictures Venus beneath it, because she lived in Italy. That thought triggers the memory that the poem is about. My grandmother's last name was Rainwater. She's mentioned in the poem. That's her real name. Mr. Phil is also mentioned in the poem, and he is the speaker's wife's grandfather. So this poem is called Smoking in Bed. I hope it's not too hard to follow. There's some, it'll go sort of in one direction and then kind of leak back at times. So I hope it's not too hard. It's called Smoking in Bed. Whenever I pass a field of artichokes, I picture Venus beneath it. For me, it's fields of tobacco and Marilyn Monroe, her nude body discovery. Nude? Naked, my parents explained. In bed, naked? I was bewildered. My dad at the wheel of our two-tone green 58 Impala, my parents and I on our way to Ocean Drive, where Grandmother Rainwater kept a house. Nearby, a beachfront novelty store. I bought a toy cigar, teased out wads of confetti and stuffed it with leaves filched from a warehouse en route. Tobacco auctions were something to see. The tip alight with red glitter, I'd smoke that enormous cigar and savor the secret. Summers running together, I married a woman whose family farmed tobacco, who breathed the fields distilled, the sweated heat of oven-tight barns, with Mr. Phil inspecting the wooden barns where leaves tied up in hands and hanging from sticks turned yellow. In Martha Ingram's account, a peasant unearths with his plow a Venus with arms and legs and a head, mindless and lovely. Posed on a shelf at the novelty store, inflatable dolls with corn silk hair. The bathing suit was red, squeeze the tummy and naked breasts pop out. Plastic telescopes, cherry and lemon and grape, popsicle colors. With these, I spied on women captured without any clothes. Y'all remember those little telescopes? You do. The idol intact. I picture my raven-haired mother in deeper than ever, her latex bathing cap a skull. She brought it up with her feet, a rose-lipped shell that came to rest. The conch so stank up the car, in spikes of weed along the highway home. Martha's Italian farmer replanted his Venus. If word got out, they'd designate his fields a site. Barely awake, rousted from bed at 5 for the drive to the beach, I follow a dark-haired girl. In 1962, we both turned 9. Down rows of tobacco, the top leaves only remain on the plants, traipsing beside her grandpa. They halt at the pack house. The leaves are loose now and lying in heaps on burlap. The ravishing smell of cured tobacco, the ghost of green fields, gilds the August heat. The next poem that I'm going to read is takes place a little bit later in time. It's an adolescent adventure, and maybe I don't need to tell you so much about it. It's called Molting. Before dawn even, zipping past the exit to Myrtle Beach. That's where my girlfriend was. who had a summer job there singing. But I was heading north to see Janet. Hot and muggy, the weather changed at Richmond to rainy. Not with a torrent of blades, but a drizzle of pins and chilly. I had to borrow a flannel shirt from Janet, a man's which fit me. Janet was renting along with her college roommate and one other girl a townhouse in Georgetown. Sometimes while they were at work, I'd venture afield to a gallery, Corcoran, Phillips. Mostly I browsed the neighborhood bookstores and otherwise loitered. I had to ask the girls, because I was getting so many probing looks from guys, if maybe I had an effeminate manner. You have, she said, the matronly one whose name escapes me, just a nice face. I slept on the living room sofa, sunburned, itching like mad. I'd scroll the peeling skin off my shoulders and roll it up into a little ball, then flick it. Overhead, the women were getting ready for bed, their heels conveying thunder, while I read by lamplight a poem in Harper's by Robert Penn Warren, whom Janet and I and her housemate Felicia had met. A problem of spatial composition, in which a hawk, like something divine, unseen above a window-framed vista composed of a stone scarp and forest, at sunset enters the frame as if from forever, only to go in an eye blink. My wife, who was then my girlfriend, who sang at the beach where noontide had blistered my shoulders, my wife says it's all about sex. Not Warren's poem, this story of mine. The thunder, having slung flimsy bras across the shower rod, puts up its feet, the women nesting. Molting, I clasp the neck of that shirt, whoever's it is, which I will shake out in the morning. The weather whistles past windowsills and under the door, and though it sings like blades cold steel, I picture within the lamplight's moon on the ceiling a hawk whose shrills are high noons killing rays. I was telling some people at lunch that for the past 9 years, I guess, I've been taking students to Greece in May. And sometimes Ashley has gone with us, and sometimes she's come afterward, and she and I have stayed a while by ourselves. And a couple of years ago, we celebrated a big anniversary, wedding anniversary, and we did so on the island of Sifnos, where the next poem that I'm going to read is set. I've kind of made up some details, so if you go to Sifnos and you don't find things exactly this way, well, I've made some things up. It's called Wedding Wind, and we had a route that we would walk every evening from where we were staying. We would go along this little bay around on the cliffside, and then over to a little along the beach and over to a church that was way out at the very tip of this rocky spur. And on the site, the church was built there really because in the bay there had been discovered an icon which had miraculous properties. And one evening, the wind was really terrible, and we began our walk, but we couldn't quite make it to the church. But we could see from a distance that there was obviously a wedding taking place. Actually, we did go to the church. We did make it all the way to the church. It was obviously a wedding taking place. And so this poem kind of pulls together, the fact that here's this old couple, right, celebrating an anniversary, and then there's this young couple getting married. It's called The other thing that I need to tell you, do you all know what semaphores are? They're those flags that are used at sea mainly. They can be distress flags, or they can be used to send messages. So anyway, wedding wind. Beyond the pines, which hid, except for the chimney, a closed off-season beachside taverna. From up on the slope, where, relics ourselves, we lodged in a derelict windmill, the blue looked firm enough to float a rock without a ripple of worry. Even so, my gaze, as though white-robed, a savior, skimmed to the boat in the cove, then stepped from the solid blue of the bay to shelves of bluer schist, a pilgrim on up to the whitewashed church on its finger of rock, to exchange with the icon a kiss for a healing look from the Virgin. Wind by evening. We took our sunset walk around the wind-chopped cove, the sailboat pitching cove, along the cliffside path, despite not only the wind, but also the crowd thronging the church. A wedding? Yes. Among the dusty cars that choked the lot was one in a wind-whipped frenzy of streamers. The Spirit aroused, of course, in us a vision of ours. By 10, electric guitars were yowling. The pines, were they dancing with wind or light from the woken taverna? The wind swelled with the odor of meat fat sizzling on coals. The taverna was smoking. Or wasn't it thunder that shook us? That fiendish, vibrating bass, and cats, the feral ones fed by our landlord to battle the vipers, serpents of lightning. In bed, as though on board, we drowsily hoisted a sail too suddenly pregnant with wind, our rope-burned hands like urgent semaphores, like creaking blades up on the slope, conducting the wind. I think that's kind of what marriage is, you know. I mean, it's like you're either calling out for help, you know, you're in distress, or else you're doing something constructive with the storm, channeling it, you know. That's my idea. I thought, little does this couple know what they're getting themselves into. I think maybe I have time for just one more. This is a poem that's set on the same island. It actually takes place on a different occasion, but it's also on the island of Signos. And in this poem, the speaker of the poem, he's there with his wife, lover, whatever, and she's leaving before he has to leave, and he can't find the car keys to get her to the port, and so she has to take a taxi. And the other thing maybe I should tell you is, if you haven't been to Greece, you may have seen pictures. You know that the Greeks love to build these little churches in impossible locations, and the poem refers to one of the churches there that's called St. Simeon's, and it's way up on a peak overlooking the port. It's called Shooing Flies. I found the car key. Maybe I ought to have sped to the port. Thanks to a taxi, you were there even ahead of time, awaiting the ferry. Instead, I braved the switchbacks, narrow, gear-strippingly steep, up that treeless rock whose peak is St. Simeon's perch. I pictured you, umbrella, gazing the harbor. Lean out from under the shade and shoot your gaze up to the blue-domed church. Is somebody up there waving? I meant to distance myself as far as I could from the port of return, spirit from body. Away, though, hadn't we relished our bodies? Out in the bay where a fisherman netted an icon depicting the Virgin, beside her whitewashed church on the severed tip of a finger of stone, I fished for you with my eyes, then handled ashore love's shivering body, which ached for another, the friction to redden its blue-lipped flame. Who would have dreamed there'd be above it all a nimbus of flowers? Yes, somebody, was waving and bitten as if by sparks, shooting flies. Thank you.